And we are live. Hello and welcome everybody to the Wide World of Warhammer. With me today are some beautiful gentlemen in the north. We got Joe to my right. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, good. I like the high quality graphics you guys have, which is way nicer than ours.
I try to do our best, okay? I hate the social media advertising thing, so let's do as much pre-work as we can and then let the rest take the wheel, right? So I'm not going to be a TikTok influencer anytime soon. Let's leave it at that. But I try my best. And with me to the bottom of my screen, the beautiful man in the Great White North, Kaz. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me, Sam.
No worries. It's been a long time coming. We've had this scheduled a couple of times, unfortunately, just fallen through due to life itself. But we finally got you. We locked you in for at least a little while. So
We made it happen.
We made it happen, and we got there. And today we're going to be talking about sort of customizing your own army and general hobby tips with these fine gentlemen who form part of the best overall show. Unfortunately, Noah's not with us just now. Hopefully, he may come in later during the show, but we'll see how we go. But before we get started rock and rolling, Joe, I'll hand it over to you because some fellow Australians and people in the South Pacific may go, what the fuck is this best overall show? So do you mind giving a little introduction of who you guys are and what you're about?
Yeah, so we do a show every other Thursday, and we mostly focus on competitive 40K, but also competitive painting and hobby as well to achieve that coveted best overall spot at a tournament.
Hoorah. Otherwise known as Renaissance Man, right? So do you use best overall Renaissance Man, or let's sort of interchange?
I think generally, at least in my area, they do best overall. So
yeah, I would concur with that. I've heard the Renaissance Man thing a couple places in the U.S., but generally speaking, I've seen best overall.
No, yeah, fair enough. Very good. And so I know you guys have been doing your podcast for a little while now. How long have you been doing it for? Do you know, Cass? Because you sort of joined early on in days.
Yeah, it was like episode 9 or something.
Yeah. So I think about a year and a half.
Time flies, eh? It's pretty wild when you think about that. No, it's a great show, and it's full of like many great interviews and guests and various hobby topics. And we'll be sort of rehashing some of those today, but also deep diving a bit more because I've really enjoyed some of the conversations. But before we get a deep dive in, so Kaz, could you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit, to people who may have never heard about you?
Yeah, so I'm Cass. I am a painter first, hobbyist first, gamer second, but I am a member of Art of War. I was a member of the Traveling 16 and coaching staff for Team Canada's WTC team, hoping to make it back on the team in one way, shape, or form. And I've been involved in Warhammer since I was a wee lad, if you will. But really just kind of stepped onto the competitive scene in the last 3 years, based in Vancouver, Canada.
Hoorah! So have you had the chance to come to Australia at all, Cass? It could be a random, complete tangent, but I have a question for a reason.
I have not, but I will say that one of my best friends and at one point in my life, former roommate, is a Kiwi. So I feel like, and I've got a few Aussie friends, so I feel like I've had a lot of cultural exchanges, if you will.
Yeah, fair enough. The reason I ask is I always hear Vancouver, Canada is very similar to Sydney, Australia. So I've always heard that comparisons, but I haven't had the chance to experience it myself. Hopefully one day, though. So
if you ever go to like Whistler, which is one of the better ski mountains around, it's mostly Australians. So like I'm basically in Australia when I go there.
Yeah, a fellow Commonwealth brethren. So, and then yourself, Joe. So for people who've never heard about you, how long have you been?
I would be surprised if people have heard about me, actually. I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so I live in a super remote area. So I don't. I've been trying to branch out over the last couple of years and travel to a lot more events. So that's probably why a lot of people don't really know me, because I'm kind of just stuck in the northern Michigan and western or eastern Wisconsin area. So, but I did go to Champions Cup this year, which was a lot of fun. That was my first big team event, playing for Team Aegis along with Cass and Noah. So, yeah. And I also am a bit of a hobbyist too.
Absolutely. We'll show some pictures of some of your beautiful armies as we go through the topics and conversations. So, and people quickly see, oh, these guys are legit and they're very amazing hobbyists. So, something I would hope to aspire to one day. We'll get there. So, just a nice little, I guess, entry level question. So, I guess today we want to talk about sort of customizing your own army, sort of making your own, and some general hobby tips for us competitive 40k players who obviously we like to meta chase, but we still want our armies to look pretty. So, I guess for yourself, I know Cass, you're going through the process now of customizing your own Grey Knights army, and I'll put some photos on screen. What's the process for you generally? Like, you want to collect an army, and what's like that general thought process for wanting to customize it and create it? Like, determining your own color scheme potentially, or wanting to follow, I guess, something very loyalist? Like, what's that process look like?
Well, I mean, the way we got onto the Ultramarines Grey Knights was I was eating barbecue at Champs Cup, and Joe had a really great idea, to be honest. But generally speaking, it's something that's either going to be, what do I want to work on hobby-wise as a skill set, or what am I looking to kind of bring in terms of my own flavor to a faction that I otherwise maybe find not so interesting. So like those Grey Knights, for example, I think Grey Knights are cool, but I'm known as quite the Ultramarines fanboy. You can look up there and see Joy Toy's second edition codex, and I'm sitting on an Ultramarine.
I was going to say, show the chair.
It's hard to see, but you can see, like, I'm not messing around. I like me my boys in blue. And as you can see on the screen, I like painting Ultramarines. So with the Grey Knights, it was kind of like, I've been putting a lot of creative energy into some commissions I'm doing right now. So I was having trouble thinking of how I was going to make these Grey Knights special. And that's when Joe kind of suggested, hey, what if they were just like a Librarius strike force of the Ultramarines? And I haven't had a proper night's sleep since, because I just kind of am ruminating over like what's the scheme? Okay, how am I going to convert certain miniatures to be representative of certain things, certain squads, but still have that feel, right? And then I start thinking bigger to like, what's the display tray going to look like? And so in that case, it's like you focus on a couple things that really excite you. So for me, it's I'm loving really exploring lighting and glows. So a full Psyker army gives me a lot of canvas, if you will, to kind of experiment on. So, but I think the most important thing is that it excites you. Whatever idea it is, like, let's be honest, building and painting a Warhammer army takes a long time. And
a little bit.
And so you're going to get pretty intimate with it, right? So you're going to have to really like that idea, whatever that idea is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're talking about like sort of making your own paint scheme or custom idea, so also your Grey Knights army, you have an idea of what it looks like in your head. Will you sort of then take, I guess, paint samples or swatches? Like, will you try and go, oh, I want these sorts of colors, and then start saving images and like having an idea of it? Or do you sort of paint a test model? What's your process for that, like determining colors?
So, I mean, I have two tools right here.
As prepared earlier.
Not really. These are just on my shelf.
Yeah.
But literally, the color wheel is a big tool that I use. And like, if you look at my blues aren't just blue. My blues have red in them. My blues have yellow in them. And it's all intentional to create a more lifelike sort of color. Like, there's red in the shadows. There's yellow in the highlights, or there's like a flesh tone in the highlights. But that is all just color theory. And really, I like to pick things that contrast and bring a lot of contrast. And then there is, like, I have this Japanese book that is a dictionary of color combos. So when I'm looking for inspiration, I'll just kind of flip through this thing, and it's got a bunch of color swatches that all work together. So I'll kind of go through, and like I'll usually have something in mind. I'll flip through this. I'll come up with a color combination that works. And from there, I was taught by a gentleman who goes by BB Miniatures on Instagram, and he taught me not to paint with a formula. So, like, I'm not the guy that necessarily is going to take, okay, this is my first layer paint, this is my second layer paint. It's less about that formulaic sort of factory approach for me, and more of a feel. Like, what mood am I trying to build with that color palette, that color scheme? And I'll actually like change it as I go. My Ultramarines, the blue that I paint now isn't exactly the same as what I started, but they're all pretty cohesive. And if I ever veer too far, I will start updating old models because it's not like we have enough to do. But really, I will usually paint one test model, see how I like it. If I don't, I'll bin it and I'll start over. And once I come up with something I like, that's when I'll start streamlining it and sort of operationalizing it into something I can repeat over and over and over again.
Yeah, sure. And will you like document that process? Like, okay, this iteration I've done these sorts of colors, and then this iteration I've done these sorts of colors, so that way you can go
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah, no, I definitely take notes on colors, orders. I've kind of applied different colors in, and the most important thing is that I never like necessarily follow it just because it's there. I will challenge myself in every step of the way. But yeah, you need to document this stuff because I mean, like, especially if you paint other things in between or you commission paint for other people, it is so easy to lose the idea of how you got to a certain color.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, oh, I'll remember this. It's always going to be this black or this blue. And then not even 24 later, I was like, crap, what did I use this to paint this color? It's so easy to forget.
And sometimes paints get discontinued, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm a hoarder. Yeah. I don't know if you can tell, but like I have a whole stock of like backups for the quintessential colors in my life, personally.
Yeah, sure. I've had a recent gentleman who's like his Tyranids, his whole carapace is like specific black color, and like he's been on the search to look for this specific black, and it's just been a pain. So anyway, hopefully he's come through his search and makes it super useful. But Joe, so obviously on screen right now we have a picture of your beautiful sister's army. So what's your general process for you, Joe, in terms of painting your own army scheme and making your own custom?
Well, I mean, generally I'm going to just start with, well, first of all, let me back up real quick. As far as discontinued paints goes, Cass, my Necrotite green is no more. I had to buy like 5 jars of these to last me for the rest of eternity.
They're coming back, Joe, though. They're coming back.
Oh, they are?
Brood lids. Yeah, they're
okay.
P3's back, baby.
Okay. That's good.
Dodge that bullet.
Arcane blue. Anyway, so I'm gonna start obviously with an army that I want to play. So, sisters, when they kind of got their 9th edition rules, I was like, oh, this army gets to cheat. So that is good because that will help shore up a skill gap on my end. And so I started from there, and then I will generally sit there for a week or so and just try different color combinations until I find something I like. And I settled on this purple, which I actually had unfortunately already used on my Dark Eldar army, but it just worked so well. And then I had this white color to go with it, so I just did it over again. So this Sisters army, absolutely hate it now. So I'm probably the only person in the world who hates the new Sisters Codex. So.
Look, I mean, we'll bring you back into the army of faith, Joe. You'll find penitence and like, I don't know, we'll forgive you eventually.
If they didn't double down on nuking penitent host with their vow or the having to take the vows on the first 3 turns, I would have considered it. But so long, ladies.
All right. Well, 11th edition sisters maybe for you. We'll come back and we'll start looking through some of your photos of your orcs. So you talked about there, I guess, you do some custom painting first up. So do you try and like document it first? Like you have an idea of what you want to paint, or do you sort of experiment by feel then? Like it's like, I sort of want to paint this, and then experiment until you get something you like, Joe. Yep. Yeah, right.
When I started my Eldar army, which I think I have a couple models from, I had painted an entire unit already and realized that this looks terrible. So I just went back and started all over again and settled on the screen with the purple highlights or the off color. So, and these are my 2 Farseers, which the 2 girls on the back is modeled after my favorite Warhammer fantasy unit, the Sisters of Twilight. So.
Hell yeah, I love it. And so obviously on screen, so some wood elf, wood elves. Apologies, are they the wood elves, right?
They are wood elves.
Yeah, cool. I was about to make sure I was correct, not like a high elf model by any means. How do you? So did you have this sort of idea of customizing? So the Farsi being obviously some old wood elves models. Did you sort of have that idea initially, and sort of, or did it come along the way?
No, that definitely came along the way. Just because I was getting dinged on paint scores for not having any converted models, because I feel like Eldar and Sisters, I didn't particularly want to convert them too much because I just like the models as is. But then I was playing Total Warhammer 3, and I was like, oh, Sisters of Twilight, there we go. I'm just going to translate this to 40k, and there it was. So
very fair. So obviously you said sometimes like some models lean themselves more to conversions and others don't. Or your Grey Knights Army Cass, you found a way to make it conversion, make it sort of streamlined. What advice would you give to people who maybe want to take that first step in doing their own conversions or customizing, which is maybe beyond a head swap per se?
I think there's a lot of good stuff out there in terms of miniatures. I think the first thing you have to do is decide what the purpose of your army is going to be. Am I taking this to every tournament I go, like Games Workshop tournament? Cool. I'm not going to be using certain miniature lines as conversions. So like step one, decide what the purpose is. For me, I need to be able to take it to a GW event. I need to be able to take it to WTC. So the rough silhouette is always going to have to match, and it's going to have to either be custom sculpted stuff or miniature bits from Games Workshop. That's kind of like my starting point. And from there, it's really about looking and seeing what existing kits are there that you can repurpose. What Joe just said about the Wood Elves on the back is like the perfect starting point. What exists where I can already sort of borrow bits from? I'll give you an example with Grey Knights, actually. NDKs. So I'm not trying to just paint the Dread Knight model blue. And I had this idea, and I'm thinking, okay, well, Librarian Dreadnoughts. All right, cool. We're on to something. So I'm looking at the Librarian Dreadnought sarcophagus, and I see a bit that I like, that I think I can use. But I want it to be Redemptor size. So, okay, I just added a Redemptor into it. But I also wanted to have the same silhouette as an NDK. So that is 3 kits that are going into one model. And I have, you can't see it, but there's like a stack of boxes right there. And I have a lot of Redemptor Dreadnoughts, and old Blood Angels Librarian Dreadnoughts for that exact reason, right? So find the kits that make sense. Think about how you're going to put them together. And then just go.
Yeah, and so could you just iterate a bit more about, you mentioned, and there's a conversation I wanted to have before, so obviously WTC they're very strict about silhouettes and sort of what you see is what you get, so you can't go above and beyond. So even though you may have the coolest idea for converting an army, like I know Noah is very famous, he wants his Admech army to be very Tyranid focused, and you're now doing your Grey Knights as Ultramarines. What sort of parameters do you try and put in yourself when making the silhouette similar? Because obviously you're not using the same models, the basis. Do you just build one, a simple one, like make them roughly the same, or?
So I will typically have a stock model as my reference point. Like I have an old used NDK I bought that just came in a bundle or a batch of minis that I bought secondhand. It's already built. It's a real thing. So when I'm building it, I am going to have that on my desk, and I'm going to make sure it's the exact same silhouette. Now it's kind of challenging, and there's certain models where, they could be a little bit taller, like my Terminators. But at that point, you're dealing in millimeters, and Jay, who is the main judge of hobby stuff for WTC, he's a reasonable man. Like if it's close enough, it's close enough, right? But I would recommend either borrow from a friend or just get your hands on like a cheap, horribly painted eBay or a secondhand purchase, and then just use that for scale. Like compare your model next to it. And if I'm really going to be worried about it, I will have at least a backup for a model. If I know that like it's not quite exactly the same, and I'll say to my opponent at the beginning of the game, hey, I have the real thing, but I'd much rather play with my really pretty toy. It's up to you. I've never had someone tell me that they would prefer if I played with the official thing. So
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It's a really great stopgap there. Is like to have the actual model there just in case, but still have your cool converted one there. I know that's been used by multiple people, and that's a really great way to do it. How about yourself, Joe? So do you? What's your conversion process? Obviously, you had the simple put the wood elves on the back of the Eldar jet bikes, but do you have like any other armies which have full conversions or a lot of conversions? I guess your orcs have quite a few.
Yeah, I'm actually working on 2 additional kill rigs right now, which I have quite the bits assortment going into. So, yeah, like Cass with his NDKs, I've got about 3 or 4 other kits going into a single kill rig. So it's grossly exceeded its normal cost target, but whatever. But it is going to look super cool. So I usually want, especially I want to have a theme. Oh, right here. This is my awesome Boss Zag's truck, which will also never get used again because he flew off into Legends. See you, buddy.
Poor Soul. Oh, well, he'll come again, right? Surely, right?
That was awesome. He's like my Orky Executioner guy, but whatever. Yeah, so I'll usually have an idea in mind of what I want to do with a character or a vehicle, and I'll just go from there. I built a truck out of like a third-party resin airplane. So I took the original truck kit and just put the flatbed on the back of this airplane, and then put a bunch of ogre tusks on the front to make a ram out of it, and that's my second truck. So.
No, that perfect. And like, there's not a single orc vehicle which hasn't been customized, right?
Right.
It's part of the orc way. Like, if you have a fully what you see is what you get, like stock standard orc truck or vehicle, other than the Games Workshop ones. What are you doing here?
Honestly, I mean, orcs are like the perfect conversion army. Let's be real.
Absolutely. And so we talked about, I guess, sort of determining a color and then sort of customizing your own army. But what sort of products do you generally use? Obviously, recently in the hobby world, the world of enamels and oil washes have become very prevalent. Airbrushing sort of become a stock standard thing. But what's your own process? So I'll go hand it to you, Cass. What's your process? Are you like an airbrush guy, or are you a stock by brush? What's the gist?
So I tend to start with the airbrush. I find it easy to lay down the base foundation of a color I want and the base lighting. So I will always black undercoat. I actually prefer rattle count. I find it more durable. And then I will take some white ink, put that through the airbrush, and I'll just sketch out my light. So if it's OSL, and like I'll use Gulliman as an example. When I was painting Gulliman, I put them together. Even I don't think I glued them. I think I blue tacked them together mostly because there were some parts I wanted access to. But I blue tacked them together, primed them, and then I went and like made the entire sword white with ink. And then I did the glow off of that. And so I kind of determined the light sources. Most of my models I kind of have the same light sources for, but I'll make exceptions. So like directional lighting. So that's a decision I make right off the bat, because every other color that I put on is going to be based off of that. And then for my ultras, I have a 2-step filter process. So like I'll put Talisar blue through, thinned obviously, and very carefully. So I'll leave some of those highlights, that white put on. And then in the shadows, I'll go back with a phthalo blue ink because it has a little bit of that red in it, and it adds a little bit of life to my color. So that's the start. And from there, I'll start refining the blue and highlighting up with a brush. I'll go back and dark line it. I have facilitated back and forth. Thank you, Lewis. I appreciate that. With using, like, when I started this army, I was mixing up a really dark blue paint that I would thin, and I would literally paint in all of the panel lines and that sort of thing. Now I am using enamels. So once I get that blue airbrushing done, actually the first step I do is an enamel sort of pin wash, let that dry, and then start highlighting up from there. So that's kind of my process. And I will go back for another round of airbrushing when it comes to any OSL glows. Like that sword and the actual glow off of Gulliman's sword are all airbrushed, and then I'll go back with a brush, airbrush, back with a brush. So it's really back and forth. And if you look at my hobby area, which is right behind me, you will see the airbrush is always set up, and then I've got all the brush stuff over there as well.
Yeah, key for success is having it always set up airbrush booth. How about yourself, Joe? Are you a similar process or a bit different?
I will say Cass is way smarter than I am when it comes to this stuff. So do not have nearly as a refined process that he does, or as technical. But I will usually just start by, and I do agree that the rattle can is stronger for the base coat, but because I live in a frozen tundra, I use my airbrush to prime everything. So
that's very fair.
I'll start with priming with the airbrush, and then I will usually just base coat a single color, whatever I think is going to be the majority color on the model. So if it's a tank, obviously whatever the armor panel is going to be. If it's infantry with a lot of skin showing, I'll probably just do the flesh tone. If it's whether it's an orc or a human or whatever. And from there, then I will go and just essentially just block in what the other colors are going to be. Metal for the guns, brown for the pants, etc. And then I'll go back with the airbrush and start doing transitions on each of those different blocked areas, usually 2 to 3 colors in the transition area. Then when I'm done with that step, I'll whip out the triple aught brush and start washing into the recesses, and then I'll start edge highlighting, which is extremely time consuming.
Absolutely. So, I guess maybe your sister's army will put on screen now. Could you give like a rough estimate how long that took you to paint this army?
That army is unique in that I painted the entire thing in 3 weeks, but that was an unholy amount of work that I will never repeat again. Yes, it involved me taking several days off of work and having my spouse go on 2 separate trips during that time frame. So I was left unsupervised for quite a few days.
Yeah.
Did you eat 3 meals a day or no?
I did, but they were not healthy meals. Usually a pizza or some sort of baked sub. So
all right.
Very, very heavy on the carbs.
As well as some paint as well on the way, right? Like just natural paint goes everywhere. Get some acrylic in you. That's never dangerous, right?
Right. But generally,
this is why we paint with acrylic.
Right. I would say it takes me about 3 months to paint an army normally.
Yeah, right. From like starfish.
Killing myself. Yeah.
Joe's one of the faster painters who paints to a quality level that he paints that I've ever seen. Like I cannot do that. That I wish I could, but yeah, it's very impressive.
How long for you, Cass? Like if you were to obviously a Grey Knights project, you're doing a bunch of conversions and stuff for now. How long will you give yourself to paint that one?
Well, I'm in a weird position right now because I was a little foolhardy and accepted a couple commissions I probably shouldn't have. So I'm kind of like doing that on the side of my desk right now. I don't expect that army to really start being fully painted until sometime next year, probably like, by WTC. And that's partially just kind of like balancing life, but when push comes to shove and I do kind of my own version of what Joe just explained, and I like button down and do it, I would say it would probably take me about 6 months, so about double what Joe would do if I was like really focused on one project. Lewis asked a question, and I just wanted to show off this product. So
beat me to it. You've done this once or twice before.
Once or twice. I prefer tape, actually, painter's tape. I'll just like stick it on my jeans a couple times so it's not too tacky, and I'll use that. But there's some parts that doesn't work for, and this putty stuff is really great. It's more or less the same as silly putty, but it's a really big box of it, and you can reuse it over and over and over again. This is just masking putty. It's beautiful.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt Cass. So people who are listening, so Lewis asked a question of what do you guys use to cover the parts that you don't want your airbrush to paint? Any tips? So, and Cass showing off there on screen, it's a masking putty. It's like very, very similar to silly putty. Was there anything else? Sorry?
Yeah, I would also suggest, like I hold on to old, I don't play Kill Team, but when I buy a Kill Team box, it comes with these cards. So I'll just like keep cards like that or old data cards. And I use those as kind of quick masking. Like if I need to stick it down, I'll just spray, hey, I got a hard edge. Cool, now it's off. And, when push comes to shove, a gloved hand also works well. So, to answer the question, I mask by any means necessary.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How about yourself, Joe?
Yeah, I just use my finger. I'll just dial my air pressure down really low, and I'll just use my thumb or finger. So.
That also works. The human body. Put your body on the line. So that's great. For the sake of art, putting your body on the line. So you talked there, obviously, the process of like some of your armies, which are painted are absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. Will you, though, sort of paint to, like, say, a battle-ready standard or a stopgap and then try and play the army, then keep making improvements? Or will you paint the whole army from 0 to hero? Hand it to yourself, Cass, first.
In a perfect world, the latter. I would much rather just paint it until it's done. We don't live in a perfect world, and honestly, like the last 3 years, I've been trying to be more competitive at the gaming side, so I have had to adapt. There is a shortcut way where I will use, the airbrushing stage of the Ultramarines, and I will maybe paint like a couple of the other colors, block out everything that's not blue and black, and then paint the bases. And that's had to be good enough before. And actually, I was really honored. At one of the GTs I went to this year, I had to do that with some of my Ultramarines. And I still got 4th place for paint. And I was like, guys, I really, you shouldn't be. But they made me fill out the rubric, and I was like, okay, well, this is my honest score. I still got 4th place. But yeah, battle ready has had to become something I've been like emotionally comfortable accepting. I don't know about you, Joe. You tend to have things finished from what I've seen.
Yeah, I usually just I think the smarter way to do it would be to get it battle ready and play with it a bit before investing more time, but I have way too much time on my hands, so I will just paint something completely before I put it on the table.
That's my dream.
That's fair. Yeah, that's good. That's fair. And so, are you guys, I guess, to yourself, Joe, are you happy accepting, look, I may not be running the optimal unit or models in replacement of having something that's painted to my standard? Is that something you're comfortable with, Joe?
Yeah, I'm actually going to a GT next weekend, and I would like to have my 3rd kill rig done, but that is definitely not going to happen. So I'll just be banging it out with 2, if all my parts get here in time. Keeping my fingers crossed. Fingers
crossed, buddy. I understand on your show you talked about how there's some replacement parts and extra bits that you're looking after, and it's getting tight. So hopefully, it's squeaky bum time right now, but hopefully it comes through. And so you mentioned that, Cass, like as we compete, like we all want to be competing and bring the medalist or what I see as the most ideal army. I know I'm preparing for my own team's event, and then with the MFM that just dropped, a bunch of sisters models and units I have to paint out now. It's like, fuck! Nice and quick. So I guess, what do you try and do anything on the back end beforehand? I know some of the best people I know in the competitive scene, they actually paint up 3 of each unit and have it ready in the back end. Is there something you try and do, or do you try and do other things to mitigate bringing something optimal competitive-wise and still painted?
Yeah, I think in terms of the way that the game has evolved, where we get updates that can completely shift what's good and what's not, I've started aspiring to have 3 of everything painted to that point. In reality, I don't, and I'll often find myself surprised, kind of leading up to an event. So I have gotten really good at just kind of going into crunch mode and painting what I need to paint in the moment. And again, one of the ways I've had to do this is kind of shift my focus away from winning the painting awards to just giving myself the best chance I have at winning Best General and going with some battle ready stuff where I can. But yeah, in this Grey Knights army, I am building 3 of every unit that I see as good right now, and gonna paint that up.
That makes complete sense. How about yourself, Joe? Or do you just sort of build 2K armies one at a time and then go from there?
No. Well, I'll usually have a list in mind and kind of build towards that, and especially with my Orc army, and my sister's army and my Drukhari army, I've gone back several times and done like, all right, here's stage 2. I'm going to add these 500 points to the army, but I'm definitely not going to do 3 of everything because that would be insane. I'll just, as points and rules update and change, I'll just adjust accordingly. So.
Yeah, the sad thing is when you set 3 of everything, some of those things will gather in cobwebs for a very long time and never see the light of day on the table. One thing you mentioned there, Kaz, is sometimes you do commission painting. In a past life, I did my own commission painting, and I absolutely hated it. But so how do you find that balance between doing commissions for other people and doing your own hobby?
Well, the best advice I could give on that is only take commissions that make you excited. Like, I am painting a Thousand Suns army right now. I'm almost done, and I'm at the model that made me accept this commission. So I'm painting Magnus right now, and I'm having so much fun doing it. You know, and so it's really those kind of like centerpiece models that I now know that I like to paint. I hate doing an entire army for someone else. It's hard, even if it's your friend. It's hard. So I don't disagree with you, Sam. I also it's a tough pill to swallow painting an entire army for someone. But the other thing is am I flexing a new muscle? Like, am I gonna learn something from this that's gonna make me better? So after I'm done this T-Suns commission, I have a Custodes army that is the Solar Watch scheme. And I have not painted an entire army in white before. And so when I did the test model for that scheme, it was really cool. It was really fun experimenting and figuring out a way to do white without wanting to blow my brains out. So it's all about making sure that you are getting something out of it outside of the compensation, right? So that you're either enjoying yourself doing it or you're learning something. So if you can make it sort of work for 2 for 1, then I say, you can make commissions work.
That's fair. How about yourself, Joe? Have you done commissions in the past, or do you do commissions currently?
I do, but the price has to be right because I will get really bored really fast. So
bored of like painting someone else's models, or bored of the process?
Bored of painting someone else's models because then in the meantime I'll have stuff that I want to paint for myself, and I'm like,
can't get
maybe I'll just sneak a guy in here in the middle of this commission. Just
yeah, sometimes you got to go back and forth. I will say that.
Yeah. So what's that balance look like? Like, I was going to ask that question of like, do you try and paint like unit for unit? So paint one of my own units, then paint one of theirs, or is there a general methodology of how you balance things out?
For me, if I don't have an event coming up where I need to paint something for myself, I will go as hard as I can into that commission to chip away. And then I'll give myself a little treat. Like, once I'm done these T-Suns, I'm probably going to paint my first unit of strikes from the Grey Knight army, and then I'm starting on some more Custodes. That's just, and I'm going to go as hard as I can until I'm like, I need to paint something for myself again. So
yeah. How about yourself, Joe? Is that a very similar process for you? Or maybe it's a bit more treats along the way, it sounds like. Maybe.
Generally, I'll have like a schedule that I'll have agreed with the person, the client beforehand. So if I see that I am getting ahead of schedule, then I will pump the brakes a little bit and do a little bit of my own stuff to keep my sanity, and then jump back into it.
That's very good and great advice there. So obviously, I guess some of the pictures we've seen on screen have included display boards. So in Australia, we have like a couple of people do some display boards and some very nice ones. But what sort of tips would you give to people who maybe want to do their first display board? And then I guess any travel tips, because they're not easy to fly with. And you're both live in very large countries, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to fly or drive long distances to get to places. What advice would you have for travel? So I'll start with yourself, Kaz. What advice would you give for display boards?
So, actually, this was, I believe, taken at an event where afterwards, flying home, TSA ripped my display board apart, probably looking for drugs. Didn't have any drugs, just toys. But I would say make it modular, so there are no open cavities that are hidden. That's step one. But But aside from that, like, a little planning goes a long way. This particular one is now modular, but it wasn't when it started out. And modularity makes it a lot easier to pack and go. For this, I'm extra. Like, this is where my fun money goes. So I bought a gigantic case that is the equivalent of a Pelican case. It's a Canadian brand called Nanook, but it's a giant pluck foam. And I have that, and I can check this because it's actually not that heavy. I tend to not get charged more than an additional piece of luggage, and I've never had, outside of TSA messing with the board itself, I've never had anything really bad happen to it or the display break. Going forward, I'm probably going to do the same thing with like the extravagant displays. Is I'll have a pluck foam situation in a really good hard case that I'm going to fly with. So that's kind of like the best option for flying that I've found. I do have a friend who is building one as well, and his whole thing is he doesn't want to have to check it. So he's building it in a modular way where it can pack down flat, fit into the pocket of his case, and then he can fit a few things in a laptop bag and call it a day. If you're okay with that, then definitely go that way. In my opinion, that's going to lead to a display tray that may be overcomplicated for the net result. And one thing I'll say about like competing with Americans as a Canadian, Americans go big. So it's kind of hard to get a big display tray that's going to pack down that small. So I've kind of like made my peace with the fact that I have this gigantic luggage made exclusively to travel with a display case.
That's very fair. Look, I mean, everything's bigger in Texas and America as a whole, so they live up to the name and stuff like that. And it sounds like TSA it just made your display tray even more modular, even though you didn't want to. But that's a whole can of worms. How about yourself, Joe? So on screen here, you got your sister's army with a nice display board. So what's your process for making a display board, and then any tips and tricks?
Yeah, if you're gonna start, if you don't have one, I would just suggest getting one like this. This is like what I would describe as my travel board. It's literally just a cork billboard that I got from Walmart, picked up at Walmart, and then for the sisters to kind of match their bases, I just found they're like, it's fake stone. It's like textured tiles. I think it's supposed to be a type of like wallpaper. And I just cut that to fit the shape, and I just painted that up. So this fits easily into a suitcase, and generally will get you your points if you're painting to a rubric. It's not going to get you a ton, but it'll fit in there and not cause a lot of grief. Another suggestion I have, which I did for Champs Cup, although I accidentally made my display board for that way too small, was I just had a couple extra pieces of terrain that weren't attached to it that I could just keep in my suitcase as well. So when I set the table up, I could have a little bit of three-dimensionality to it.
Yeah. So will you do a display tray for each of your armies? Is that your process or ideas, or will you sort of have like a universal, very similar display board that you could take across a number of armies? I'll hand it over to you, Joe, first.
So yeah, well, it's just going to come down to which armies are based similar. So my Eldar and my Orcs are based the same. So I will share boards between those two. My regular board for that army is, as a typical American, gigantic. So that will not fit in a suitcase, and it's probably about the size of, I don't know what to compare it to. It would fit comfortably on the dashboard of my car, so it's pretty big. And it's just blocks and blocks and blocks of foam stacked on top of each other. So there is nothing modular about it at all. So that one will not travel ever. So, but like the sisters table tray, that is obviously separate with a different basing scheme. And then I guess if you wanted to, you could feasibly, one thing I'd considered in the past is adding magnets to the back of the board and painting a backdrop that would fit each specific army, and then you could swap that out easily between the two or three.
That's a really smart idea, just having the
That is.
backdrop be very different, but the same underneath. That's a really smart idea. We'll get there eventually, but no, let's go the hard process of making a new custom one for each of the armies. I assume that's you as well, Kaz, like a new custom one for each of the armies? Yeah.
I too am a masochist, Sam. Yes, I and like I live in an apartment in Vancouver. It's not a lot. I don't have a lot of space, but I will continue making gigantic display boards for each army. I think my first step would be to draw it out and kind of draw out the measurements. Because I do want something I can travel with in the worst case scenario can go in my gigantic case. I have been known to drive to events that I probably have no business driving to, like LVO, just so that I could bring my display tray. But I definitely, I definitely make bespoke for each army because I feel like. More and more I'm seeing rubrics, and like just a couple weekends ago, Cascade Clash, Team Aegis's event, was happening, and I was the head paint judge for that. And one of the key things there is like expression. That's on the rubric, and a display tray that is just the sort of travel version that Joe said without a backdrop. It got a couple points, but there were the winners of that, like the top 10 were splitting hairs between half a point. So if I'm going with that competition in mind, like I need this to tell a story and really illustrate that. And in my opinion, you can't get to that level without it being bespoke to an army.
That's very fair. Unfortunately, when it gets to that tipping point of where it's competing for 1 and 2, the little finer details matter. And painting the back of Farsight sword sounds like the difference between winning and losing, but that's a story for another time. So, a heartbreaking one. So you've mentioned there a couple of times about painting rubrics, and I know the ITC hobby tracks is a very popular thing in North America. Not as much in Australia and the South Oceania, but that's something maybe it'll catch on eventually. So for people who are painting to their first rubric or overall thing, what advice would you give to them to maybe make their army pop out a bit more, or be more favorable in terms of the judges? I'll hand it over to you, Joe, first to provide your wise words of wisdom.
Well, this actually kind of touches on a discussion Cass and I had last night. If you're painting for points, if you want hobby track points, you just have to look at the rubric and make sure you're hitting most of the criteria on there. And that can result sometimes in an army looking a bit forced, kind of lacking an artistic touch to it. But I mean, if you're painting for points, that's what you're painting for. So,
but Joe, we can't even read a player's pack. Do you expect us to read a painting rubric as well? Come on, buddy.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't get a painting rubric ahead of time, so you're left wondering when you get there, what do I need or what did I miss? Sometimes you will paint and you don't even know what you scored, and nobody will tell you, and you'll just be left wondering.
Yeah, but fair enough. So what advice would you then give to people who maybe want their army to pop out a bit more, be that more appealing? Is there, like, generally, do you want saturated colors or desaturated, or focus more on the characters or the bulk? Like, what are some like general tips and tricks that you could provide?
If you're just painting to make your army pop out and get a lot of attention, then yes, you do need to paint in bright colors, and you need to have large models in your army that are going to catch people's attention. And LEDs also will do that, and also having a giant display board will do that as well. So that is the reason I made my orc board as big as it is. So when I set it up at a tournament, it is, a good 1.5 feet above everybody else's, just because it is, incredibly large. So people will naturally, just as they're scanning the room, see that, oh, what's that big thing over there, and go and take a look.
Just be imposing. That's all that matters. How about yourself, Cass? Any tips and tricks?
So, I mean, my best advice I can give you is don't paint to the rubric. I like, and honestly, like, I know that sounds fresh coming from a guy on a show called The Best Overall Show, but I think the painting rubric is a semi-necessary evil that has come out in our competitive hobby, and in an attempt to make something extremely subjective objective, and that's not truly possible. I have watched artists that are so talented lose out to people who just, checked a lot of boxes better. And it's heartbreaking, like when you really get invested in it. So my best advice is build and paint something that speaks to you. Now, if you want to do well without necessarily chasing the rubric, because it's easy enough to chase a rubric, you don't need my advice. But kind of like what Joe said, like you want to catch people's attention. But the way I look at it is you need something. You don't need all of the things. You don't need a giant display with lights and smoke machines and then gigantic models that make sounds and stuff. Like, it doesn't need to be that over the top. You just need something where, because, most tournaments are in a large hall, like a big room. You want to catch people's attention. I found verticality in display boards is a really good way to do it. So you want to do something to draw people in. But once they're in, like the way I judge my own success, because I'll stand back and I'll watch people look at my board. If it draws people in, and then as they lean in, they go, whoa, and then lean in even closer, and then say, holy shit, and then ask if it's my board or take pictures, like that, I quit smoking 2.5 years ago. Ever since then, that is exactly how I get my dopamine. Like, that's it. And hey, if I win a trophy about it, great. But that sort of like drawing them in and then having them look closer and see all the little hidden gems that you've left, like that to me is the most important thing. The other thing I will say, a lot of people like the color black or dark colors in general. While you could be a very talented painter and paint those colors well, or those shades well, technically, it doesn't make for a lot of contrast in a miniature. And that is what the human brain likes. Like, that is what makes a model look great. The thing about contrast at a 28 millimeter scale is it's really hard to illustrate if your entire palette is dark. You can have it be a darker palette with some pops of color, and that'll be effective. But this is why I use the color wheel when I'm kind of thinking about my color schemes, because you want to pick colors that contrast to each other. And then when you're thinking of your darkest version of a color and your brightest version of a color, you've got to go big range in a very small amount of space. So if you do that, when those people lean in, they're going to have a really good reaction, and they're going to lean in and say, like, this looks great, rather than, oh, the display board looks great, but these models are painted like shit,
Yeah, that's fair enough. Some great words of wisdom there. But you did mention the color black, though. But Cass, surely the only way you can paint your base rims is black. I mean,
yes,
surely, right?
In my heart, yes. But,
Got me.
Yeah. It'd be black, or is it scorpion green? If that's the old school like Warhammer base.
Oh, goblin green.
Goblin green. So there you go, goblin green.
I had a commission of the lion that I painted for a friend, and his entire Dark Angels army has magenta base rims, and I literally said, paint it yourself. I'm painting it black, and I gave it back to him, like, you can paint the base rim however you like, mate. That's your model now. I'm not doing that to a toy.
Yeah, we'll paint everything else. I do all these other fun things, but God forbid I paint this black base rim magenta.
You've got to stand for something, Sam. Or else you stand for nothing.
Very fair. So I know you're both very busy professionals with lives and families and whatnot. So how do you sort of build time for your own hobby and doing commissions and stuff like that? Do you have any advice or words of wisdom for people to sort of build more time or be able to save some time in doing this work? So, and if to yourself, Cass, for any suggestions?
If you have a partner, communication is key. I will often check in and just kind of just ask, like, hey, how are we? Like, are you good? Do we need to spend more time? Or just, hey, here's a heads up. I've got a tournament coming up this weekend. I'm going to like plan some time to spend specifically with family, doing stuff for us. But then I'm going to need to prep. And so it's just a lot of planning beforehand, I find, and communicating about needs is really how I have managed to continue to convince my lovely fiance to help support me in this hobby. Beyond that, like, I would also say when it comes to hobby, there are no real shortcuts. Every time I've really tried to take a shortcut, it's ended up costing me more time. So just set appropriate goals based on the amount of time that you have, and you won't be disappointed.
That's very fair. Like, as you mentioned before, like for you to get your Grey Knights army, it's going to take quite a while. Like you're planning for WTC next year, rather than the World Champs of Warhammer's like a month away. I could try and get this ready, but realistically, not.
I borrowed an army for that because I didn't want that pressure.
That's very fair. How about yourself, Joe? Do you have any time-saving tricks and measures, or do you have a process you follow or a schedule?
I would strongly agree that you need to communicate with your partner if you have one, because that was the source of quite a few fights early in my marriage. We're good now, so. But I am blessed and cursed with my work schedule. It rotates every 6 weeks, so I'll jump from night shift to day shift and back and forth. Right now, when I'm on night shift and my wife's at work and the kids are at school, I am just at home all day by myself, which is when I get an obscene amount of painting done during the day. When I'm on day shift, not so much. Then I usually just get about an hour window when the kids are going to bed, and then quality time with the wife after that. So not a lot of painting time.
That's fair. So just managing expectations and doing it where you can, and then making the most of it. So, and I know earlier in the show, Joe, you mentioned you live in the, as Australians would like to say, middle of bumfuck nowhere in Michigan, in a very remote area. I know you've previously talked about like traveling 2 hours plus for random pickup games in person and stuff like that. So I guess,
Absolutely.
How do you try and still connected with the hobby and people and communities while being relatively isolated?
Well, I mean, that just comes down to social media. And I would say I have been pretty well isolated up until starting the show. And then I kind of got introduced to Noah and Cass, and that's they've kind of been my window into the greater Warhammer world, which still is a very small window for me, but it is a window nonetheless. But yeah, traveling like 4 hours for an RTT is usually pretty common for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, so and then I know some Australians can definitely sympathise with that. That's not uncommon here either for some people. So yeah, so the online social media, and I know you play TTS as well, so I'm sure that helps as well, get you games and stuff like that. So yeah, how about yourself, Cass? So I know you live in Vancouver, but majority of like I guess Team Canada and the comp scene is traditionally East Coast, which for people who aren't as geographically knowledgeable is quite a bit away.
Yeah, Canada's a massive country.
Yeah.
It's like and for some reason, flights within Canada are like insanely expensive. It was like I had to fly to Montreal for work, and it was like a $1,200 ticket for a 5-hour flight. Like it's insane. But there is a competitive scene that is kind of growing even, and has been around for a while, but has been small traditionally in Vancouver, Kelowna area, and Vancouver Island. Like I'm going to a GT, not this coming weekend, but the following weekend in in Nanaimo, which is on Vancouver Island. So there are some pockets of competition, but for me, what really helped me kind of up level my Warhammer game was traveling to the US. So, I was playing games in Washington State, and then, flights are hilariously cheaper for me to like drive down to Seattle and then fly out from Seattle and go to like Kansas City, or go to other tournaments in like Texas and whatnot. So getting air travel ready has been a big boon. I really got a great experience at WTC, and honestly, for the first time, met a lot of my fellow Canadians outside of WCW that I hadn't met previously. So now I'm kind of like, okay, maybe I make the time and budget to go to like 1 or 2 events out that way. But it's really been easier to travel traditionally into the US for me.
Yeah, and so just make it work somehow one way or the other. So that makes sense. So obviously we talked about a bunch of advice and tips and tricks. So, but to you guys, so I'll start with yourself, Joe. Do you have any recommendations, or maybe if people want to get more material information about army painting or hobbying that you would recommend, like some Instagram pages or YouTube channels or random blogs?
Well, when I first got into airbrushing, I just sat down and watched all of the next level painting airbrush videos, and I'm pretty sure he's still banging out pretty regularly. So that would be a good start spot. There were a lot of tutorial videos just starting just basic stuff to more advanced, and I just sat there and watched every single video minute by minute and took notes, and then I would just go back home and translate it. So trial and error and lots and lots and lots of hours in front of the airbrush booth.
And just reiterating the message that it's going to be the literal best of all days and just keeping that Kenny Beats energy all the way through. Hell yeah. How about yourself, Cass?
So I mean, it's hard for me to say where I started because I started so long ago that a lot of it was trial and error, and then YouTube happened. And it was like I was learning from the fire hose. But I would say two artists that have kind of helped me really up level from where, you know, I could maybe get best painted at a small GT to the point where I'm at now, where, you know, I've won large events, best painted, best overall, and all of that. And like, actually one of my prouder ones, I think I have, yeah. So if you ever get a chance to go into a real like miniature painting competition, like the Emerald Brush is a semi-local one where they like, these are the guys that are painting busts. Like, that's a whole other level. So two painters that really have inspired and taught me, one of which was actually my tutor, BB Miniatures. I mentioned it before. He's a good friend of mine, Brandon Baker. Lovely artist. He has his own sort of Patreon tutorial situation, but you can find him on Instagram, BB_miniatures. He is how I think. He has taught me how to think about color and light in a different way than the sort of heavy metal base coat edge highlight mindset. And then the other artist is known as El Miniaturista. He is just the master of glows, and like that has really inspired me. You know, you want to talk about contrast and making your army pop. Like, the way that guy paints glows has me convinced he's putting some like radioactive waste in his paints or something. I've accused him of it online before. He laughed. But that is, I would say those two are kind of like my biggest artistic influences. And I would, if you haven't heard of them or seen them, go check both of those guys out. Ridiculous talent. They make it look like I'm painting with crayon.
They're both very talented. And what was funny when you were looking at the Redemptor picture there, I was like, that's a very El Miniaturista photo with the glow there. So lot of nice influence there. And I think it must be the water, right? It's the Spanish paint water. That's
I think it is. That is what they say.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Angel Herraldez always says. So it must be
another fantastic.
Yeah,
actually, you know what? I got one more shout out too. Sergio Calvo. Golden Demon winner. I happened to like Vancouver is actually generally the Pacific Northwest is a hobby like Dragon's Den. And locally there's a bunch of really talented miniature painters. It's funny, like I have a hard time winning local painting competitions, harder than some of the ones that I travel to. But sometimes they will arrange for artists like this to come and do like a weekend workshop. And I was fortunate enough to actually attend in person a Sergio Calvo workshop, and like the amount of skills that I picked up from that weekend was insane. So if you ever find yourself lucky enough to be within arm's reach of one of these artists, go. I don't care what the price is. I don't care what you have to do. Like, move your schedule around and go. I gave this advice to Andrew Gagno, and Sergio was doing a workshop, and he said he got so much value, and he learned so much too. And if someone like Andrew Gagno is learning from you, like, holy crap, you must be amazing. So Sergio, I mean, is a Golden Demon winning painter, so that goes without saying. But believe me, a weekend workshop, you can learn a lot more than you think.
Yeah, and so like that's a question there. So just to build upon this, but so why would an in-person tutorial be better than? Because obviously there's hundreds of YouTube videos or Patreons you could follow and PDF tutorials. But like, what did you get out of the in-person experience versus the online or visual experience instead?
So I think one of the biggest things is immediate feedback, of like, hey, I'm having like, I hear what you're telling me to do. I'm doing it, but I'm getting this problem. And having them kind of look at your situation and give you the exact sort of approach they would use to fix whatever that error is. Also being able to pick their brain about why. Like, I don't know about you, but like for me, I always needed to know why. It's gotten me into a lot of trouble in life. But like, the why is very important to me. And I think that there is no way to pre-record content that's going to answer all of those questions and give you the like, no, don't do your brushstroke like that, do it like this, like those little nuanced details, which painting miniatures is it's a very delicate art form. So having someone that talented be able to like correct you in real time and give you those tools is just, it's a different experience. Like both are valuable, don't get me wrong, but I would go out of my way to make sure that I could attend something like that in person.
Yeah, I did have the same sentiment. So it was a bit of a trick question because I did a workshop with Vince Venturella like almost 4 years ago. It was fantastic when he came to Australia, and it was fantastic. That in-person experience, that immediate feedback is great. So for people who ever get the chance and find someone they enjoy, whether it's army painting or theory or whatnot, it's always a great experience in my mind. So and hand over to yourself, Joe. So is there any final plugs or shout outs you'd like to make, or maybe an insight into what the best overall show is doing in the future?
I know we're going to start doing more team events, so stay tuned for that. And we are obviously always still focused on hobby and competition as well. So, and I think as soon as I get my workspace in order, which it is in a constant state of disorder, I'm going to probably start trying to do some tutorial streaming as well.
Look at this. Joining the YouTube Patreon game. Let's look at that.
Yeah.
No, he's got his TikToks and is being a Zoomer with all that stuff, and you'll get the YouTube stuff. So it's fantastic. How about yourself, Cass? Any insights on what's in the future? Or any plugs or shout outs you'd like to make?
What's in the future? I mean, we're going to keep doing the show we're doing. We are trying to be a little bit more organized, less chaotic. So we originally started the show with the idea of a rotation of topics based on community, hobby, gaming. Our show by nature is a little bit of all three of those each episode, but kind of having a focus. So tune in and check us out, and kind of we're going to be following that formula more. Otherwise, I've been a little bit quiet on my Instagram lately. It's just been a busy time of life. I'm also planning a wedding, which is a lot right now. But if you want to see more of the Grey Knight army that I'm going to be building, and like some of the commissions that I'm painting, I'm going to be posting all of that on my Instagram or Facebook, Cass Paints. So check me out there.
Very good. Yeah, I'll have links for all those in the descriptions down below. And I would be remiss without shouting out Aegis Games. I know they've been talked about a couple of times in the show. That's the store that Noah owns part of or owns fully. I wanted to pick his brain about living, I guess, the nerd dream of owning your own local game store, but they'll have to say that for another time. So it's like the old adage of like, let's buy a bar, right? But for a nerdum, right? So very good. And let's wrap up the show. So we have Lewis, last little bits and bobs. So he asks, my big problem is that I like the clean look of miniatures. So miniatures look clean and very, I guess, precise instead of ones with a lot of bloom. Are you weird? Lewis, I don't think you're weird. It's okay, bud. You like what you like.
I think that is that's an artistic choice that I generally subscribe to as well. I don't like putting a lot of like weathering and debris on mine. I like to just keep it clean. But again, that's something that if you're painting to a rubric is usually on there, so you have to consider it at least.
Yeah, so. Like I will say, I'm gonna put my paint judge hat on because I recently did this. Weathering and debris and that sort of thing is all well and good if it makes sense and tells a story. If your army is fresh off the line and just getting to the battlefield, they're going to be shining. Like, why would my Ultramarines have rusted armor? That's insane. So follow your heart and paint your minis clean then.
Yeah, absolutely. But even then, like, you can do what you want if you want to go for the paint judging scores. I was trying to quickly find the image in the back end, but I couldn't find it. I think a year or two ago, there was a very famous entry of it was like blood effects on a Contemptor Dreadnought, and it got silver or like gold or bronze. I'm sure you can picture what the one is, and it looks very messy and dirty and not this traditional Golden Demon way, but it won very well. But then in the same category, there's very clean miniatures. But if you're going to try and win Golden Demon or a painting competition like that, you do have to sometimes fit a style or just say fuck it and ignore the rubric, and that's completely fine as well. So you do you. So no, thank you very much, gents, for your time today. I'll let you get the rest of your evenings back. But before we just wrap things up, just want to do some quick plugs. So patreon.com/down under 40k. If you have some events in New South Wales that you want to join, get early entry and a little bit of discount. Tip Top Terrain, obviously they're the league sponsor for terrain, have GW and WTC sets in all MDF formats, and they're always great. And they're currently doing little fucking neoprene mats. So you know those neoprene objective markers? They're doing them for the actual bases instead of the MDF or something else. That's so great.
They are so much better because they don't slide around.
Oh,
very key.
I've got my set on the way. I can't wait. So, and then last but not least, we have Mperor. So Mperor, if you want to buy any hobby products like GW stuff, get up to 20% off. The hobby is expensive in Australia. I will save any penny we can. So thank you very much, gents, for having the show. It's been great insights. I'm pumped up and hobbied up. So the rest of the day will be painting up my sisters and getting them ready for a team's event in 2-3 weeks, and everything will be fine. No, it'll be all good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
No worries. Long time coming, and I hope to do it again sometime.